Welcome everyone to Thursdays with Franco, where we have Jason Lowe and Stuart Coggins helping us today talking about AutoREST APIs with Apex. Hey Stuart, hey Jason.
Morning.
Hey Franco, how are you, mate?
Even better for being on this session today. So this session called AutoREST APIs with Apex. Now, Jason, I think you're going to be showing us about a recent project you've been doing with Stuart. Now, I really hope it's around a customer engagement versus something that's more of a side thing. So, Jason, over to you. What are you going to show us?
Actually, well, let's start with that. Here's a photo from LinkedIn with one of our product managers, Kara Nielsen, and she's more from the analytics cloud side. So Stuart, you've been there in Melbourne at a very similar scenario, right? So what do we see in front with the guy in the seat?
We're seeing the guy playing the simulator, and I think obviously there's a lot of fun, and yes, that's in the F1 paddock. So directly above the pits, behind the window, there is the racetrack at Silverstone from the weekend. So they ran the simulator that we've been running everywhere. I think the biggest sort of comment I can make is that everything we do around that simulator and the amount of fun we have, it's all absolutely applicable to any of our customers. And so the whole data collection, we basically streaming the data. I think we've covered this a few times, streaming the data from the game, and then we run it through various spaces in the database and analytics to get the insights from how good or not the drivers were. And there's no judgment whatsoever. Except when you show your laps.
You can see, okay, I am going to bring that up on screen. So as part of the recording, as part of my official take, this is my times from Tuesday. So we've actually got a local instance of this running, and it actually appears, and this is in an Apex application that we've got. So this, my last session I did, this track that we're doing here is actually the so down here I've got Brisbane, and I've actually done Melbourne and Silverstone. So this is a Melbourne track that we're actually seeing my times for. So that's my last session. This is my best laps for the day. So I have been going around in circles. So Franco, this has been part of Thursday with Franco. So this is actually part of real work that I'm doing.
You're convincing no one, you know that. I've tried, it doesn't work. Dad, what are you doing? I'm playing Formula One. It's for work.
So as part of that, as part of today, what I've done is actually I've taken that data and I've been able to put this into apexoracle.com. So we can then show better things with the APIs, and this is what the data looks like. So in this, I've got two tables. One's the leaderboard, which has the lap, each segment, and also some analytics in terms of the positioning in terms of the particular session, which is a gaming session, the event itself. So the F1 Sim B&E is an event, and then an overall position across all these different events. So I've got a sample data set that's there. And if we look at the data itself, then pretty much what we see in the Apex, I've replicated into here. So we can see just an example of the AutoREST in action. So Franco, there's the REST API link there. Did you want to see the data?
Not yet. So the point you're making, I just want to tease this out.
Yeah,
if you've got any sort of table in Oracle Application Express Apex, there is a tab called the REST tab that you go to, and then you go REST enable object. You hit the yes option.
That's right.
Authorization required. You either say yes or no, and then you hit the apply.
Exactly.
Obviously, I do recall you actually have to REST enable the schema, which we can do. We can actually walk through that later on. And then that URL that you were showing us is then the RESTful URI that we can interact with for select, insert, update, delete, etc.
Exactly. So in terms of them moving forward from here, then this is what this URL looks like and some of the data format. So we can see the ID, the lap time, the different segments there. We can see it in a pretty format. So so we get minutes and then seconds in terms of that format, so it can be displayed a lot easier. And then we've actually got that session ID, which is coming from the game itself that we're populating as part of this each record. Now, what we're seeing here is actually a summarized view. What actually gets streamed is actually we're doing that at a 60 frames a second. So, which means we're getting 60 data points from the game of a lap of the car in motion in terms of the geometry and then telemetry of the car. And then we've summarized all that data up into what we're seeing here. So there's some really good data engineering there.
Let me get really, really technical. So if we can imagine that a piece of data is going from the actual Xbox to where you're going like that.
Yeah.
Right, because a second's like that, right? Instead of doing one of those, you're actually doing it like that.
That's how Jason drives, actually.
Right.
Yeah, so that's right. So what we do is the game will broadcast the telemetry. So that's part of the game that's built in. So the way we look at that is it could be a sensor, it could be a transaction data. So yeah, we stream that into the database and it goes in essentially as raw data. And as Jason said, this is a summarized version. So we use some of the Oracle analytic functions to say, give me the top ranking based on several different criteria. And this table here, this view of the data is that summarized version. So I think what you've just seen here is Jason's just created a REST GET with no code whatsoever. In fact, I think it was probably 3 clicks in total from the database. So that's why that's pretty neat, because of course we can also then go and insert and update using that same capability.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Let me ask you a question now. Now, that's really cool if I'm doing simple stuff, but if I actually want to make this a little bit more interoperable and expose this API so other people can interact with it, you know, the benefits of REST APIs is you can make them self-describing and all of that sort of stuff. Can you show me how you can do that?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've got is as part of REST APIs, there's this thing called Open API standard, and that is a way that you can describe all those different operations that Stuart sort of made mention, but in a different, almost like a metadata type model. Now, what I've done over here is on this different screen, I've actually imported that directly through a URL. And this is what actually appears in terms of that Open API format. So it shows that, hey, I can query it, I can actually add a new record, I can do batch load, which we'll sort of be talking a little bit later on, of a CSV file. That's all described here. But one of the things that's great about this editor.swagger.io, it allows me to actually have this in an interactive mode and not actually need to codify anything. So for me, if I wanted to do a get of all the records there, I can hit an execute button. It already knows that it came from that server, so it already knows that endpoint. And then I can then see those outputs already up on screen that's been provided to me.
That's
so
cool.
I can play with those. The other thing that's interesting here, which is once you start getting into your development phase, is like, okay, I want to create a client example of this API in a different type of language. So if I want to do in PowerShell, Groovy, I know some of the other people like Scotty loves his PHP. So he can then grab the PHP one and then start interacting with this API.
That's great.
And there's something you can do similar in Postman. If anyone's ever used Postman, you could do something similar in there where you add in your API. I mean, I don't want to scare people, but this is almost the equivalent of documentation, where the APIs are documented for us. And I know no one knows what that means or has never done documentation ever. But this goes a long way to helping document the APIs. And of course, once again, the idea that all we did was right click and say enable for REST, and that's all available to us. So it does accelerate the journey quite a lot.
Yeah, what it doesn't do though in this space is it gives you the access to those APIs, but especially from a querying perspective, you're going to be doing a lot of different, potentially doing lots of queries. Like what you were saying before in terms of that leaderboard, what is my top 10, or what are the laps of a particular, less than a particular threshold, or those kind of things. And that's where we've actually got a facility around filtering. So this is the documentation for ORDs. And one of the things I'll bring up is this filtering in queries. And the terminology here, Franco, you use the term query by example, right?
Yeah.
So this is where we can use different parameters and a structure to actually query and create that, what we would typically do in SQL. We can create that as part of that URL.
Yeah. So instead of if someone would normally do this in SQL, you're implying you can have those little filters or those whereby and order by things, whether they're simple or compounded or complex. You're actually showing me you can actually put that in a URL. And given what's possible with things like Python and Node.js and JavaScript, there's no reason why people can't then interact with these cool REST APIs that can be quite smart. Yeah,
so here's an example that I've practiced before. So if I'm doing this and say, give me the leaders for the Melbourne track, and then that will actually pop up with just those records. So if I then change that to
can you make that screen bigger, because it's it's hard to focus on that very small writing with all the rest of the writing.
Yeah, no. But this is Silverstone,
right?
So these are my so as you can see down here is actually got the Apex with the query with the track ID. It is encoded. I don't have to type it that way. You can just type it normally, but it will encode those brackets and the equal signs and those kind of things along the way. So it's machine safe.
Cool.
So what those links do is give you pagination. So for instance, if you've got like 1 trillion records, you obviously don't want to return 1 trillion records inside an API. So you'll see there it says a limit of 25. And so you can be very specific about how many records you bring. So if you're doing paging, for instance, and again, what's quite nice is the fact that he hasn't actually written any code to do that. And so, you probably would want to do something a little bit more prescriptive and detailed. But if you just want to get a POC up and running with an API, there it is.
Yeah.
That looks like it. I could do that in 5 minutes, right? So
Franco,
that's yeah.
I'm sure. Hang on. If you think it's so simple, then show us.
Challenge.
Right now?
Yes, right now.
Okay. Challenge is accepted. Let me see. Let me just make sure there's nothing on my screen in the background.
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? Well, I want to see your lap times, Franco, around Melbourne.
No, we're not going to do that, Stuart.
And yes,
I'll tell you mine. Mine are Mine are around about 1:36.
Yeah, and
So
we're already taking dibs as far as how you going to go. So things in chat's actually warming up there, Franco.
okay, so I've got an autonomous database here, and the very first thing I've got to do.
What you need is to show your screen.
That's a really good point.
It's a good idea.
And Scott, hey Scotty, saw your question while he's bringing it up. Yeah, it's an interesting question around GraphQL. GraphQL is definitely in a different way of describing this. What it probably does is actually opens up the data model quite prescriptively, such that you're pretty much describing everything and your data model in GraphQL. I suppose this is probably a balance between having APIs constructed that have been curated versus something that is, hey, here's everything you've got access to. It definitely means your data modeling needs to be a bit more controlled, as opposed to very simple and curated.
And Stuart's actually shown me a couple other ways of actually getting some of these APIs exposed that are more task-based and let's say different levels of granularity. But let me get back to my challenge. The first thing I need to do is get so just people may not know, I've got an autonomous database here up and going. We all know that takes 2 minutes. There's database actions. I've actually just clicked on Apex. And because I've got a heap of workspaces, I'm just going to create a brand new one. So I'll create one called FU test, and I'll put in my password.
Good luck.
You don't have to speak it out.
And
that's a movie thing. You have to do it when you're typing. You have to read out what you say. And that's what they do in movies.
Okay, so I've now got a brand new workspace, Apex workspace. So if I come to the object browser, and
it was worth the entry price just to see that.
There's no tables. So we're going to go to this thing called RESTful Services, and we're going to register the schema with ORDS. And I'm actually going to install the sample service, and I'm actually going to go save schema attributes.
And magic. This is live, and we're doing it in front of everyone, in front of a live audience.
Now, my understanding is this may not work, but let's actually, and I'm more interested in showing it not working, because there is one thing I haven't done, but I'm going to wait for us to get to that point so I can be embarrassed. So here's that table. Here's the data, right? So we're going to expose that. I'm now going to go REST. I'm going to hit REST enable object. Authorization is required, no. And I'm going to hit apply.
Normally we would do authorization there. I think just for the sake of not having to go through user IDs and passwords and stuff on screen. So normally we would do authorization there, of course.
And we can have a different session around the OAuth authentication.
Yeah. Now, I was expecting an error there, but I didn't get the error. And the error normally says something about granting privileges so I can do that. And if that was, and it actually tells you about that privilege, if you had to do that, or is that for the JSON thing? I think that's actually for the
It's
JSON.
for Soda. That's for Soda, you have to grant the Soda app. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So Soda is very similar, but
right.
Keep going.
So now I get this, copy to clipboard, and I now come over to here, and I now go paste and go. And I'll make my screen bigger for Stuart's eyes.
Thanks. Much appreciated.
So that's it. I've actually done it. I've done it. How long did that take?
What on, Franco?
Nicely done.
So,
And that's
just to
creating a
show-
workspace as well. That's what a bonus that is.
yeah, so let me actually load another bit of data in because I'm on a roll now.
Oh, careful.
Jeez.
Copy and paste.
Can you upload your wine cellar? Oh, no, okay.
I can upload my wine cellar.
I'm joking.
I'll upload Stuart's student history here. And
It's not quite that long.
education, go load data. And so that's using the sample data sets. There's 23 records in there. And I'll come back to, actually, I'll just go here, go view table and click on edu.
That's
and
him.
click on rest.
That's
You're
EMP.
on the employee again.
Oh, good on you guys.
And Scotty's actually asked for a filter.
That would be right.
Because Franco always needs a filter.
So Scott, I'll answer your question in a second when Franco's done this about the performance.
There we
Because we
go.
definitely felt that.
Look at that.
We found. Okay. Okay. And can you, I've got probably an example of the filter I can grab here.
Well,
Just give me
why don't I give you a sample one that I use for as part of the track. I'll put that into the. Actually, I'll do the track one, and then you can then just do a quick copy.
Okay, yeah, if you do that for me. But where are you going to put it?
That's into the chat.
Okay.
So
and
just copy
I
the
will
Q equal the question mark Q.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
and come over here. Oops. Go over there. Go paste, and I'll make this screen a bit smaller. Look at the data for. I actually need to look at the data, don't I? So let's actually pick. Let's pick department equal to accounting. Shall we try that?
Yeah, let's do that. So within these filters, you pretty much got the breadth of a where clause across all these different the REST API that you got. I think where we look at joins and those kind of things, that'd be more about, okay, presenting the API such that you've got the data set there as opposed to building everything on the front end. And Cogs, that probably goes back into some of the performance things in terms of where that happens. So
Yeah,
you want to have a chat about that?
Yeah, we'll do. So look, one of the things we've used this model for quite a few years for a lot of our demos because we can do it so quickly. If we just want to ingest data, in fact, I've got a customer presentation a little bit later where I'm ingesting data from sensors, just Bluetooth sensors, and we use this model. So for, I would say 99% of our use cases, the performance has been spectacular. We regularly get, you know, many hundreds of records per second through REST API, and that's on a sort of post basis. The addition of JSON and blobs to the process has made it a lot easier and a lot more efficient to do the streaming. We've definitely seen a difference in performance in ADW over ATP. In other words, ATP is designed for transactions, whereas ADW is designed more on the sort of analytic side. So we've definitely seen a performance difference there, and in some cases quite significant. For the Formula One use case, because we were streaming, essentially we've got 4 packets of data coming in at 60 Hertz. We're pulling in about 17,000 records a second, and each of those has a significant amount of data points. For that, we found we were losing some transactions through REST. So we then used a database connection. So Jason could talk to you all about that because he's done a fantastic job of fixing that for us. So it's just that we found that REST was always really performant, but in this case, it really struggled with this, you know, that amount of records per second. So, you know, we do have to sort of model our use case a little bit on that. So worth looking into, but this will, for most use cases that we see, this is fine. I don't see many use cases where we need 16,000 records a second.
So,
not in our day job.
So as you guys have been talking,
Yep.
I've been learning all about these filters with that, and did accounting, filtering on accounting, and
Nice.
Jean Johnson. So thank you for helping me develop my skills, Scotty Fletcher. That was a really good thing there. I'm going to flick back to you, Jason. I don't know how you guys get me to work harder than you guys when we do these bloody sessions. So Jason, is
Yes,
it
sir.
true you can also use these to do batch uploads?
Yeah, so the batch upload is a thing that you can do in terms of this, and I think just looking at the time, we'll just squeeze this in very quickly. So I'll bring my browser back up, and what I'll do, I'll actually do this through the Swagger editor, because hey, I don't want to be I hate coding, so
You're not convincing anyone, buddy.
No.
So as I said, we actually had a second table there, which was of the drivers. So I've just loaded it up, and we've actually got the Swagger document here for drivers. And you mentioned about the was it the batch load, which
Yeah.
allows us to take a CSV file and actually load that in. So let's actually give that a go. So I'm just going to try it out. And now it's actually allowed me to put in a string here. Now, I've actually picked up a data set off the, with all the, where is it? With the car drivers from this year. So actually, as part of the game, actually, the Formula One 2021 game. So what I'll do here is I'll bring that up into the screen. Let me just bring it in and put that in here. So in here, we've actually got ID, drivers, abbreviations. That's all matches into the table. So that's how it actually finds out. So if I run that and execute that, that's going to actually load that in and load that table into the database. So if I go back to the object browser, go to drivers, and then see the data, then here's all the data that's being pushed in because of that.
How
So,
fully functional is that API just by clicking yes on that object browser? I never
yes,
ever
Franco.
want to hear. I never ever want to hear you guys saying you've created all these API methods, and all you bloody did was hit one button.
Yes, it's one of those hidden secrets.
And Franco, the power of yes.
The power of yes. Okay, we've covered a lot today. So thank you, Jason, and thank you, Stuart. I'm hearing you guys justify why you need to spend more time improving your lap times and playing with that code on that Formula One thing. But I really appreciate how you've walked us through AutoREST of APIs with Oracle Apex. Yes, you can do a lot of this capability via ORDS and AutoREST just from SQL. You don't need to have Apex to have a lot of this capability, but Apex does provide a really easy interface to get this sort of experience up and going as well. And yes, with that AutoREST API, you've got something that gives you a bit of metadata, gives you an open API engagement, so you can use it for a bunch of other capabilities. We've got select, insert, update, delete. We've seen the batch load. Great session today, Jason and Stuart. So let's wrap it up there, Helen. That's the end of Thursdays with Franco on AutoREST with APIs.